You're nothing but an ignorant janitor. How dare you give advice on adult matters? Richard Blackstone screamed with total contempt. He had no idea he was about to hear 5 words that would silence him forever. It was Thursday, 2:30 p.m. on the 45th floor of Blackstone Tower in Manhattan, headquarters of Blackstone Investments, and Richard was demonstrating exactly why he struck fear into everyone. His $2 billion fortune had created a monster, the most feared boss in New York City. Incompetent, he bellowed at Michael Rodriguez, a 45-year-old financial analyst, making him drop papers on the marble floor from nervousness. How can someone your age be so clumsy? Michael just lowered his head, trying to collect the documents with trembling hands. Father of 3 kids, he couldn't lose this job, even being humiliated daily. The entire office froze. 28 employees pretended to work, but everyone was paying attention to the morning torture that had become routine. In 7 years, Richard had transformed his company into a corporate concentration camp. And you, Jessica, he pointed at the 22-year-old intern, think this is funny? Want to be next? No, Mr. Blackstone, Jessica stammered, red with shame. Then work, he exploded. Nobody here gets paid to watch the show. Sarah Chen, executive assistant for 4 years, watched with contained revolt. She had witnessed hundreds of humiliations, but never got used to the gratuitous cruelty. You know what your problem is? Richard began his daily intimidating speech. You have no backbone, no determination. You think success falls from the sky. He walked between the desks like a predator, each step echoing on the imported Italian marble. The $8,000 Armani suit, the $150,000 Patek Philippe, the handcrafted Berluti shoes. Everything screamed superiority. Amanda Wilson from legal took anxiety medication due to the toxic environment. In 3 years, she had developed panic syndrome. Pathetic, Richard said, a word he loved using to demonstrate superiority. Completely pathetic. It was at that moment the door opened discreetly. A 48-year-old woman entered wearing a navy blue cleaning uniform. It was Maria Santos, the company's new janitor. Unlike everyone there, Maria showed no nervousness or fear. She entered calmly, greeted with "Good afternoon," and began working with precise movements. Richard stopped yelling, irritated by the interruption. He was used to employees who cowered in his presence. That woman seemed indifferent to the emotional storm. Maria, he said condescendingly, you're new, so I'll explain the rules. During important meetings, cleaning staff waits outside. Maria stopped and looked directly into his eyes without intimidation. Understood, sir. Next time I'll check before entering. The response was professional, but something in the way she spoke, without submission, as equals, disconcerted Richard. For 7 years, employees trembled before him. That woman had responded as if he were just a normal colleague. Furthermore, Richard tried to regain control. We have extremely high standards here. Everything must always be impeccable. I always keep everything impeccable, Maria responded simply. Her naturalness irritated Richard deeply. He expected reverence, fear, excessive submission. Do you understand that this company is worth $2 billion? He said, trying to impress her. Our clients are politicians, businessmen, celebrities. I understand, Maria agreed calmly. It must be rewarding for you all. Rewarding? Richard repeated, incredulous. This is power, influence, control. Maria finished cleaning and looked at him thoughtfully. Do you feel happy, sir? The question was like a punch. Richard was left speechless. No one had ever asked if he was happy. What kind of question is that? He stammered. A normal one, Maria replied gently. Sometimes people get so focused on conquering that they forget to ask if it makes them happy. The office watched fascinated. Someone was treating Richard Blackstone like a common human being. "I am very successful," he responded defensively. "Materially, yes," Maria observed. "But what about true friends, close family, moments of peace?" Richard felt growing anger. How dare that janitor question his life? "My life is none of your business," he exploded. "You're here to clean." "You're right," Maria agreed tranquilly. "Sorry if I was inconvenient." But the damage was done. See, for a few minutes, Richard had been treated like a common person, not a business god, and that bothered him deeply. It was just the beginning. Maria had planted a seed that would grow until it completely destroyed Richard Blackstone's empire of terror. The following Monday, Richard arrived at the office determined to re-establish his absolute authority. The episode with Maria had irritated him all weekend. "General attention!" he bellowed upon exiting the elevator. "I want to talk about hierarchy and respect." Employees shrank at their desks. When Richard started talking about hierarchy, someone always got hurt. "Some of you," he said, walking slowly between desks like a general inspecting troops, "seem to have forgotten who's in charge here." His eyes searched for Maria, who was discreetly cleaning the side corridor. "Some people," he continued, raising his voice so she could hear, "think they can question decisions, give opinions, interfere in adult conversations." Maria continued working methodically, showing no reaction. "But I'm going to make it very clear." Richard stopped and turned directly toward her. "There's hierarchy here. I am the owner. You are employees." "Mr. Blackstone," Sarah tried to intervene diplomatically, "we all understand the company structure." "Shut up," he exploded. "I didn't ask for your opinion. This is exactly the problem. Everyone thinking they have the right to speak." Maria stopped cleaning and observed him calmly. "May I ask a question, Mr. Blackstone?" The silence was absolute. Everyone awaited the inevitable explosion. "A question?" Richard screamed, incredulous. "You have the audacity to interrupt my speech to ask a question." "It's quick," Maria said tranquilly. "Fine," Richard said with venomous sarcasm. "Enlighten our ignorance with your infinite wisdom. Why do you yell so much?" The question was so simple, so direct, that Richard was momentarily speechless. "Excuse me. Why do you need to yell to be heard? Competent people don't need to yell to demonstrate authority." The comment hit like a precise arrow. Richard turned purple with rage. "I yell because you're all deaf," he screamed even louder, "because you only understand with force." "I see," Maria nodded thoughtfully. "So the problem is us, not you." "Exactly. But there's something strange," she continued, ignoring his fury. "What? If everyone here is incompetent, why did you hire us? Doesn't that say something about your selection criteria?" The implacable logic of the question created an embarrassing silence. Several employees lowered their heads to hide smiles. Richard opened and closed his mouth several times, trying to find an answer. This is... Besides," Maria continued calmly, "a company reflects its leadership. If everyone here has problems, maybe the problem is in the leadership." The office was in total shock. No one had ever questioned Richard's leadership so directly. "Are you accusing me of being a bad leader?" he screamed, neck veins bulging. "I'm not accusing," Maria replied serenely. "I'm observing patterns." "What patterns?" "Leaders inspire. You intimidate. Leaders develop people. You diminish them. Leaders create loyalty. You create fear." Each word was like a precise stab to his ego. "I am an exceptional leader," he screamed desperately. "If you were," Maria said with devastating simplicity, "you wouldn't need to scream to prove it." Richard stood in silence for long seconds, trembling with rage and frustration. For the first time in 25 years, someone had fundamentally questioned his methods. "You," he said, voice hoarse, You're fired." "Why?" Maria asked calmly. "For insubordination. For asking questions, for disrespecting hierarchy." "I see," Maria nodded. "So here questions are disrespect, feedback is insubordination, and reflection is offense." "Exactly." "What an interesting work environment," she observed philosophically. Richard was about to explode again when his phone rang with extreme urgency. It was a call that would change everything. "Mr. Blackstone," his assistant's desperate voice echoed through speakerphone, "we have a national emergency that needs your immediate attention." And so began the crisis that would put Maria and Richard in a situation where only one would emerge victorious. "Emergency meeting now," Richard bellowed before even leaving the elevator. "Everyone in the conference room in 1 minute." It was Monday, 4:45 p.m., and Richard had received the most important call of his career. Panic was written all over his face. Employees ran like soldiers to the glass room. Emergency meetings meant catastrophe or billion-dollar opportunity. There was no middle ground with Richard. "People," he said, trying to sound calm but clearly nervous. "I just received a call from the Treasury Secretary." The silence was absolute. A call from the Treasury Secretary to Richard could only mean something gigantic. "America is on the brink of a financial crisis that could destroy our economy," he continued, voice trembling. "International investors are withdrawing $200 billion by midnight today." Michael swallowed hard. "200 billion? If this happens," Richard explained, "the dollar will plummet 60%, inflation will explode, stock market will collapse. It'll be 2008 and 1929 combined, multiplied by 10. Jessica was pale. "And what does this have to do with us?" "The secretary personally chose me," Richard said, trying to demonstrate importance, "to lead a national emergency operation that could save the country." "What kind of operation?" Sarah asked. "I need to convince the 5 largest investment funds in the world to keep their money in America. Video conference at 10 p.m. with fund presidents from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East." The weight of responsibility was crushing. 5 men controlled trillions of dollars. If they decided to withdraw investments, America would enter the worst crisis in its history. "What's the problem?" Michael asked. "The problem," Richard exploded, "is that they only negotiate in their native languages. The Frenchman wants French, the German wants German, the Japanese wants Japanese." "And the 5th?" Amanda asked. "Arabic," Richard screamed, running his ends through his hair. "I need 5 simultaneous interpreters specialized in international economics in 4 hours." The impossibility of the situation was obvious. Simultaneous interpreters for international economics were rare and expensive. Getting 5 in 4 hours was mathematically impossible. "I already tried every translation company in New York," Richard continued desperately. "Nothing. It's Monday afternoon, markets closing, impossible." Robert tried to help. "What if we use automatic translators?" "Automatic translators!" Richard screamed. "We're talking about trillions of dollars. One wrong word and America breaks." The desperation was palpable. Richard, who always had absolute control, was facing a situation where his money and power solved nothing. "If I can't get these interpreters," he said, voice breaking, "the secretary will choose another businessman, and America will enter the biggest crisis in history." It was at that moment that Maria entered discreetly to clean the meeting room. "Maria!" Richard exploded with frustration. "Not now! We're trying to save the country!" Maria stopped and observed the situation. Screens full of economic charts, papers scattered, team in total panic. "Looks like an international confidence crisis," she commented calmly. Richard stopped screaming. It was the 4th time she had demonstrated specific knowledge. "How do you know this?" "Massive foreign capital withdrawal always indicates Loss of confidence, Maria explained naturally. Investors get nervous and create a domino effect. Exactly, Michael exclaimed. That's exactly it. Maria observed the documents for a few seconds. May I make a suggestion? Richard, desperate, nodded. Anything. These investors don't just want economic guarantees, Maria said with surprising authority. They want to see competent leadership, absolute transparency, and specific commitments. Continue, Richard asked, fascinated. Each culture has different protocols. Americans want concrete numbers. Europeans want sustainability. Asians want long-term relationships. Her knowledge was impressively specific. Maria, he said slowly, do you understand international finance? A little, she replied modestly. And languages? Do you speak other languages? Maria hesitated. Some. How many? Richard asked with growing urgency. English, French, German, Japanese, and Arabic, she listed casually. The silence in the room was deafening. You're kidding me, Richard murmured. I don't usually joke about languages, Maria replied simply. Richard stared at her for long seconds, processing the impossibility of the situation. The company janitor spoke exactly the 5 languages he needed. Maria, he said, voice trembling with hope and desperation, could you help us? I can try, she replied tranquilly. Richard had no idea he was about to discover that the simple janitor was the most qualified person in all of America for that mission, and that in a few hours she would not only be saving the American economy, but also completely destroying his world. During the next 2 hours, Richard desperately tried to find professional interpreters. Each call was a more painful failure than the previous one. What do you mean nobody's available? He screamed into the phone. This is a national emergency. Sir, the voice on the other end explained patiently, simultaneous interpreters for international economics have schedules booked months in advance. It's impossible on short notice. Richard hung up forcefully and immediately dialed another number. Hello, James? Richard Blackstone? I need a huge favor. Frustrating pause. What do you mean only available Thursday? I need it today. Maria watched the growing desperation while continuing to work. Each failed call left Richard more nervous and irritated. Columbia University, languages. Department, he tried a new approach. I need to speak with a Japanese professor. What do you mean you don't handle business emergencies? With each no, impossible, and unavailable, Richard felt his historic opportunity slipping through his fingers. Maria, he finally said, stopping all calls, are you sure you speak all those languages? I am, she replied calmly. And international economics? Do you really understand it? Sufficiently. Richard studied her with growing desperation. She was his only option, but betting America's economy on a janitor seemed insane. Okay, he said, making a desperate decision. Let's do a test. What kind of test? I'll call an American friend. You talk to him about investments, in English. Maria nodded tranquilly. Richard dialed Marcus Thompson, a businessman from Wall Street. Marcus, Richard from Manhattan. I have someone here who will discuss some investment opportunities with you. He handed the phone to Maria. Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson, Maria said with perfect accent. I understand you're interested in emerging market opportunities. Richard was impressed. Her English was impeccable. We're currently structuring a sovereign bond initiative that could yield significant returns while supporting American infrastructure development, Maria continued, with impressive technical authority. Fascinating, Marcus responded, clearly interested. What kind of guarantees are we talking about? AAA government backing, Federal Reserve co-participation, and currency hedge mechanisms to minimize exchange rate risks. Richard was speechless. Maria spoke like a senior economist from the World Bank. After 10 minutes of fluent technical conversation, Marcus said, "Richard, whoever this woman is, she knows more about international finance than most of my Wall Street advisors." When Maria returned the phone, Richard looked at her with mixed admiration and terror. "How do you know so much?" he asked. "Experience," she replied vaguely. "What kind of experience?" "I worked some years with international organizations." "What organizations?" "It's complicated to explain." Richard felt there was much more to her story, but time was running out. "Maria," he said, swallowing his pride, "I need your help. America needs your help. I understand. But there's one thing," he added, trying to maintain some control. "If you help me afterward, we'll talk about a salary increase." Maria looked at him with a strange expression. "An increase?" "Yes. From janitor to administrative assistant, $2,000 more per month." The offer was ridiculously inadequate for someone who had just demonstrated knowledge worth millions of dollars. "Mr. Blackstone," Maria said calmly, "may I make a counteroffer?" "Sure. If I manage to save this operation, if I manage to convince the 5 investors to keep money in America." "Yes?" Maria looked directly into his eyes. "You give me your company." The silence in the room was absolute. "My company?" Richard screamed. "Have you lost your mind?" "It's a fair bet," Maria said tranquilly. "If I fail, I leave the company and never come back. If I succeed, I keep everything." "This is ridiculous." "Why? If I'm just an ignorant janitor, what's the risk for you?" The logic was irrefutable and dangerous. "Besides," Maria added, "if I manage to save the American economy, don't you think I deserve more than a $2,000 raise?" Richard was cornered. Without Maria, he would lose the historic opportunity. With her, he was betting his entire life. "Fine," he said finally, "but when you fail, besides leaving, you pay a penalty of $100,000. "I accept," Maria replied immediately, "but if I succeed, besides the company, you work for me as a janitor for 1 year." The bet had become deadly for both sides, and Richard had no idea he had just bet against one of the most powerful people in the global financial system. It was at that moment of absolute desperation that Richard, at the height of his frustration, made the most reckless decision of his life. He stood up dramatically, looked at all the terrified employees, and then at Maria, who observed everything with impressive calm. "Listen well," Richard screamed, slamming his hands on the table. "I'm going to make a bet that will mark this night forever." The office fell into absolute silence. Everyone knew that Richard, in desperation, was capable of any madness. "Maria," he said, pointing directly at her, "if you manage to save this operation, if you manage to interpret for the 5 biggest investors in the world and convince them to keep money in America." He paused dramatically, creating suspense. "I'll give my entire company to you." The shock was absolute. Employees looked at each other incredulously. Richard had completely lost his mind. "Mr. Blackstone," Sarah exclaimed, "you can't be serious." "I am deadly serious," he screamed. "Blackstone Investments, $2 billion, everything. If she manages to save America, the company is hers." Michael tried to intervene. "But sir, this is impossible. She's what?" Richard exploded. "A simple janitor, exactly. If a janitor can do what not even the best economists in the country can do, she deserves to own this company." Maria remained impassive during the entire explosion. "And if I don't succeed?" she asked, calmly. "Then you leave the company today and never set foot here again," Richard responded cruelly. "And you still pay a penalty of $100,000 for making everyone waste time." "Mr. Blackstone, this is abusive," Sarah protested. "It's fair," he screamed. "Either she's competent as she claims, or she's a liar deceiving everyone." Maria stood in silence for long seconds, analyzing the situation. Everyone awaited her response. There's one condition, she finally said. What? Richard asked, suspicious. If I succeed, besides the company, you work for me as a janitor for 1 year. The room exploded in shocked murmurs. It was the most brutal reversal anyone could imagine. Are you crazy? Richard screamed. Me? Cleaning offices? That's it or nothing, Maria said with absolute coldness. If you want to bet your company, bet your dignity too. The silence was sepulchral. Richard was visibly furious but also desperate. Without Maria, he would lose the chance to save the country and his reputation. Fine, he said finally, voice hoarse with rage. I accept, but when you fail, besides the penalty, you'll clean this office for free for an entire year. I accept, Maria replied tranquilly. But first, Richard said with a cruel smile, I want you to prove you really speak those languages, in front of everyone. How? Say something in each of the 5 languages, now. Maria nodded and began with impressive naturalness. In English, good evening, I understand you're concerned about American market stability and potential capital flight. In French, bonsoir, nous avons préparé une stratégie complète pour rassurer les investisseurs européens. In German, guten Abend. Amerika bietet langfristige Stabilität und attraktive Investitionsmöglichkeiten. In Japanese, Konbanwa, Amerika no keizai wa ante shite ori, chokiteki narieki wo motarasu desho. In Arabic, Masa al-Khair, al-Iqtisad al-Amrik mustaqir wa sayu'addu ila, awaid wafia. The silence that followed was absolute. Her fluency was perfect, pronunciation impeccable, technical knowledge evident. My God, Michael murmured. How is this possible? Jessica whispered. Richard was pale, beginning to realize he might have made the most dangerous bet of his life. Satisfied? Maria asked simply. You really know, he reluctantly admitted. Then let's begin, Maria said, already taking control of the situation. First thing, I need total access to the company's financial system. Why? To show investors exactly how a successful American company works. Absolute transparency. Richard hesitated. Giving total access meant she would see all his business secrets. It's this or cancel the bet, Maria said coldly. Fine, he agreed reluctantly. Second thing, during the video conferences I'm in command. You speak only when I authorize. This is humiliating. It's necessary. International investors respect competence, not arrogance. Richard gritted his teeth but nodded. Third thing, if I succeed, I want everyone here to witness the fulfillment of the bet. Of course, Richard said, confident she would fail. Maria looked around the room, seeing tense and expectant faces. Then let's save America. But what Richard didn't know was that he was about to discover that Maria wasn't just a polyglot janitor. She was someone with credentials that would make any economist in the world tremble with envy. The cruelest bet of Richard's life was about to transform into the greatest public humiliation that New York had ever witnessed. And it would all begin with 5 simple words she was saving for the right moment. Before we begin, Maria said with growing authority, I need to make a call. To whom? Richard asked, suspicious. To confirm some data with my former colleagues. Former colleagues from where? Maria picked up the office phone and dialed an international number. Hello, IMF? This is Maria Santos. I need to speak with Dr. Christine Lagarde. The silence in the room was deafening. IMF? Michael whispered, incredulous. Shh. Maria signaled for silence. Christine, this is Maria. Yes, that Maria. I'm in America working on a special project. I need updated data on Latin American capital flow. Richard felt his blood freeze. She was talking to the former director of the International Monetary Fund, as if they were close friends. Perfect, Christine. Can you send it by email? Yes, I still have system access. Thank you, dear. When she hung up, everyone was speechless. You know Christine Lagarde? Jessica asked, astonished. We worked together for some years, Maria replied casually. Worked where? Richard asked, his voice coming out as a squeak. At the IMF, I was Senior Director of Monetary Policies for the Americas. The impact was like a nuclear bomb. Richard had to lean on the table to avoid falling. You're lying, he whispered. Maria took out her phone and showed her contact list. Names like Jerome Powell, Fed, Mario Draghi, ECB, Xi Jinping appeared naturally in the list. My God, Sarah murmured, she has phone numbers of central bank presidents. And heads of state, Maria added naturally. I worked 18 years coordinating global monetary policies. So why are you working as a janitor? Amanda asked, confused. Maria sighed. Long story. I denounced a corruption scheme involving American and international politicians. They put me on a blacklist. What kind of corruption? Richard asked, fascinated and terrified. Money laundering through tax havens, $50 billion diverted from development funds. And you denounced this? I was the one who discovered and brought evidence to international authorities. Result, 8 senators arrested, 5 bankers extradited. Richard swallowed hard. And the retaliation? Lost job, house, car, health insurance. No financial institution hires me. International blacklist. That's why you're here? My daughter has cancer. I need formal employment to maintain health insurance. Janitor was the only job I could get. The room fell into emotional silence. The woman Richard humiliated daily had sacrificed a $1 trillion career to fight corruption. Maria, he said, voice trembling, can you really save this operation? I can do better than that, she replied confidently. I can transform this crisis into the biggest investment opportunity of the decade. How? I personally know each of the 5 investors who will participate in the video conference. I know exactly what they want to hear. Richard looked at her with growing admiration and terror. Do you really know them? Maria showed photos on her phone, her at official dinners, G20 meetings, IMF events with the exact investors who would participate in the meeting. François Dubois, from the largest French sovereign fund, she said, showing a photo, extremely conservative, wants solid fiscal guarantees. Klaus Weber from Germany, obsessed with environmental sustainability. Tanaka-san from Japan, only invests in countries with absolute transparency. Ahmed Al-Rashid from the UAE, values long-term relationships above everything. And Zhang Wei from China wants access to commodity markets. Richard was amazed. You know each one's personality? I worked with them on dozens of operations. I know how they think, what they value, how they negotiate. So you really can do this? Maria smiled for the first time since entering the company. Richard, you just made the smartest bet of your life, only on the wrong side. What do you mean? Because when I finish tonight, you won't just have lost your company. You'll have learned what it means to work for someone who really understands international business. Maria's transformation was impressive. In 15 minutes, she had gone from an invisible janitor to becoming the most powerful person in the room. And Richard was beginning to realize he had just bet his entire life against one of the most influential women in the global financial world. Now, Maria said, taking total command, let's prepare the presentation that will save America and destroy your arrogance forever. Now let's begin the real work, Maria said, taking total command of the situation. First video conference in 2 hours. We need to be prepared for each investor. She went to the whiteboard and began drawing a complex scheme that demonstrated deep knowledge of global finance. François Dubois From the French Sovereign Fund, she began. Controls $3.2 trillion. Extremely analytical. Wants concrete data on inflation, fiscal deficit, and trade balance. Richard watched, fascinated, as she created detailed psychological profiles of each investor. Klaus Weber, from the German fund. $2.8 trillion under management. Obsessed with ESG, environment, social responsibility, corporate governance. Ahmed Al-Rashid from the UAE, the most conservative of all, only invests in countries with minimal political risk and absolute transparency. Tanaka-san represents the Japanese pension fund, hierarchical culture, respects personal relationships above numbers. And Zhang Wei from China wants privileged access to American commodities, oil, technology, agriculture. Richard was impressed. How do you know all this? I work directly with each of them on at least 15 operations, Maria explained. I know their families, hobbies, fears, ambitions. Can you really convince them? I can do better. I can transform this crisis into the biggest investment opportunity America has ever offered. How? Maria turned to the team. You're going to help me create 5 personalized presentations, one for each investor in his language, focused exactly on what he values. Is this possible in 2 hours? Michael asked. With my coordination and your knowledge of the American market, yes. She began delegating tasks with military precision. Michael, I want a complete report on fiscal stability of the last 7 years. Data to impress Dubois. Sarah, American environmental sustainability, renewable energy projects, emission reduction, everything for Weber. Robert, government transparency and regulatory frameworks. Al-Rashid needs legal guarantees. Amanda, US-Japan commercial, relationships. Tanaka values historic partnerships. Jessica, American commodities and export potential to China. Zhang wants production numbers. The team worked with intensity they had never shown before. For the first time, they had a leader who knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. Maria, Richard asked while she supervised everything, do you really think you'll succeed? Richard, she stopped and looked directly at him. You made the riskiest bet of your life, but also the smartest. Why? Because in 2 hours, you'll see how a real international negotiation is conducted, and you'll understand why I was considered one of the best in the world. At 8:30 p.m., the 5 presentations were ready. Each was a masterpiece of financial persuasion, perfectly adapted to its target audience. Impressive, Richard admitted, leafing through the materials. They're better than anything I have ever seen. We haven't started yet, Maria smiled. Now comes the really difficult part. What? Convincing 5 of the most powerful men in the world to trust America again. At 9:45 p.m., the video conference room was prepared. 5 screens, 5 simultaneous connections, state-of-the-art simultaneous translation equipment. Remember, Maria said to Richard, during the calls, you speak only when I authorize. You're representing an entire country. Understood. And Richard, she added, regardless of tonight's result, your life will never be the same. Why do you say that? Maria smiled enigmatically. Because you're about to discover what it means to work with someone who really understands power. At 10 p.m. sharp, the 5 calls connected simultaneously. On screen appeared the faces of the 5 most influential men in the global financial system. Good evening, gentlemen, Maria began in perfect English. Thank you for joining us in this critical moment for America and global markets. The authority in her voice was unquestionable. Richard immediately realized the investors recognized and respected her. Maria, François Dubois exclaimed with joy. I thought you had disappeared from international finance. Temporary sabbatical, François, she replied diplomatically. But tonight, I'm back to discuss an opportunity that could reshape global markets. Mein Gott, Maria, Klaus Weber interrupted in German. Was machst du in America? Sehr wichtige Arbeit, Klaus, she replied fluently. Ich werde dir zeigen, warum Amerika die Zukunft nachhaltiger Investitionen ist. The other investors greeted each other in their respective languages, Arabic, Japanese, Mandarin, and Maria responded to all with impressive naturalness. Richard watched, speechless. In 5 minutes, Maria had transformed an emergency video conference into a friendly meeting among old acquaintances. Now, gentlemen, she said, returning to English to include Richard, let's discuss why you should not only maintain investments in America, but triple them in the next 12 months. What happened in the next 2 hours would be remembered as the most brilliant negotiation in American financial history. And Richard was about to discover that Maria hadn't revealed even 10% of her true qualifications. During the next 2 hours, Maria conducted the most impressive negotiation Richard had ever witnessed. She didn't just translate, she orchestrated a financial symphony worth billions of dollars. François, she said in French, showing detailed chart, la discipline fiscale américaine s'est améliorée de 340% depuis 2019. Le ratio dette-PIB est maintenant plus stable que l'Italie ou l'Espagne. Dubois studied the numbers with admiration. Ces chiffres sont remarquables. Maria, qui a préparé cette analyse? Mon équipe ici à New York, sous ma supervision directe. Richard was impressed. She was presenting his company as if it were from an international investment bank. Klaus, Maria switched to German. Schauen Sie sich diese Nachhaltigkeitsprojekte an. Amerika wird bis 2030 der weltweite Marktführer für grüne Energie werden. Weber leaned forward, fascinated. Das ist unglaublich. Diese Investitionen in erneuerbare Energien, sind sie real? Absolut. Und wir bieten europäischen Investoren direkte Beteiligung an diesen Projekten. Each presentation was a masterpiece perfectly adapted. Maria knew not only the languages, but the cultural mindsets of each investor. Ahmed, she said in Arabic, المستوثرون العرب يقدرون الاستقرار والشفافية. هنا تقرر التتبك للسنوات الخمس الماضية. Al-Rashid, notoriously demanding, examined the documents meticulously. هذه الشفافية تفوق حتى معاييرنا العربية. Tanaka-san, Maria bowed respectfully before speaking in Japanese, demonstrating understanding of cultural etiquette. America to Nihon no partnershipu wa 70 CP nen ijo tsuzuite imasu. This Japanese smiled, clearly touched by the respect for protocols. Maria-san, anata wa totemo keiken ga aru. Kono kankei wo moto fukai mono ni shitai. And finally, Zhang Wei. Maria switched to Mandarin. Zhongguo dui miego de tuze jiangzai wei lai, xinian nei zengjia sibe. Zhang Wei nodded approvingly. Ni defensa hen junkwe, women shu yao geng duo zeyang de hezwo jihui. Richard watched, hypnotized. Maria didn't just speak 5 languages, she thought in 5 different cultures, simultaneously. Gentlemen, she said, returning to English, we have specific proposals for each of you. She presented an investment package of $500 billion, strategically distributed among the 5 funds, each focused on the specialties of each investor. France gets infrastructure and green bonds, $120 billion. Germany takes sustainability and renewable energy, $100 billion. UAE gets technology and fiscal transparency, $90 billion. Japan takes manufacturing and long-term relationships, $90 billion. China gets commodities and logistics, $100 billion. Maria, Dubois said impressed, c'est la proposition de marché émergent la plus complète que j'ai vue en 25 ans. Magnifique, Weber agreed. Du hast eine Krise in eine historische Gelegenheit verwandelt. Mumtaz, Al-Rashid added, هذه المهنية لا مثل لها. Subarashi, Tanaka said respectfully. Wanmie, Zhang Wei completed. Maria smiled with satisfaction. So we have an agreement, gentlemen? Unanimously approved, Dubois declared. Genehmigt, Weber confirmed. Muwafaq alayh, Al-Rashid agreed. Shonin, Tanaka nodded. Tongyi, Zhang Wei finalized. When the connections ended at 12:15 a.m., the office exploded in applause. Maria had achieved the impossible, not only maintained investments, but quintupled foreign capital entry into America. $500 billion, Michael murmured, incredulous. Over 5 years, Sarah added. It's the largest fundraising in American history. Richard was in total shock. Maria, how? Experience, she replied simply, and relationships built over 18 years. But this means, he swallowed hard, that I won the bet, Maria completed calmly. The silence in the room was absolute. Everyone remembered the conditions. If Maria succeeded, she would keep the company, and Richard would become her janitor. Maria, Richard tried one last negotiation. We can talk about this. A bet is a bet, she interrupted coldly. But you don't understand. I built this company, and you bet it on a single play. Richard looked around seeking support, but everyone avoided his gaze. He had dug his own grave with his arrogance. It was time for the moment that would define the rest of their lives. Maria stood up, looked directly into Richard's eyes, and pronounced the 5 words that would silence him forever. Maria stood up slowly, with the dignity of someone who had just saved an entire country's economy. The office was in absolute silence, everyone awaiting the historic moment. Richard tried one last desperate resistance. Maria, let's be reasonable. I was desperate. I spoke impulsively. A man is worth his word, Maria interrupted coldly. Or aren't you a man of your word? But I built this company. It's 25 years of my life. And you bet everything on a single play, Maria replied implacably, out of pure arrogance. Richard looked around the room, seeking support, but everyone avoided his gaze. Michael, Sarah, Amanda, Jessica, all the employees he had humiliated over the years, watched in silence. Besides, Maria continued, there's a delicious irony in all this. What irony? Maria walked to the window, observing New York at night. For 4 years, they called me a traitor, corrupt, destabilizer. They destroyed my career for doing the right thing. She turned to him with a smile that mixed triumph and justice. And today, the traitor saved the American economy. The corrupt prevented a crisis that would destroy millions of jobs. The destabilizer brought historic stability to the country. Maria, Richard tried to speak. I'm not finished yet. She silenced him with a gesture. Do you want to know what my real crime was? Why they really destroyed me? Richard nodded, hypnotized. Because I discovered the corruption scheme involved high-level American politicians, senators, cabinet members, even white House staff. My God, $50 billion diverted from development funds, money that should build schools, hospitals, roads, stolen to enrich half a dozen parasites. The confession was breathtaking. And when I denounced it, they didn't just fire me. They spread that I was the corrupt one, that I was embezzling money. That's why the blacklist. That's why everything. 4 years destroying my reputation, my family, my life, because I dared challenge the system. Maria walked up to Richard, stopping centimeters away. But you know what's funny? She asked, her voice loaded with irony. What? Today, I saved exactly the system that tried to destroy me, because in the end, I love my country more than my personal revenge. Richard stood in silence, processing the moral magnitude of the woman before him. Now, Maria said, returning to business tone, about our bet. Maria, please. You're going to fulfill exactly what you promised. 1 year as a janitor, cleaning this same office where you humiliated me for 3 weeks. But this is fair, she completed. You said people like me were born to serve. Now you'll discover what it means to serve. Richard tried one last card. And if I refuse? Maria smiled coldly. Then I'll make public that the man who saved America was fired and humiliated by you. I'll tell all the investors who just trusted $500 billion in the country. The threat was devastating. Richard would be destroyed, internationally and nationally. Besides, Maria added casually, I have recordings of all your humiliations from the last 4 years. Moral harassment, abuse of power, creation of toxic environment. You recorded? I always record everything. Habit of someone who's been betrayed before. Richard was completely cornered. So, Maria asked, will you fulfill the bet or prefer to be destroyed publicly? It was at that moment, with Richard totally humiliated and without escape, that Maria approached him, looked directly into his eyes, and pronounced the 5 words that would silence him forever. You're fired. Get your things. The impact was seismic. The man who terrorized employees with these same words now heard them for the first time in his life. Richard stood paralyzed, speechless, completely without reaction. For the first time in 25 years, someone had totally silenced him. The silence in the room lasted eternal seconds. Employees looked alternately at Maria and Richard, processing the total reversal of power. Starting tomorrow, Maria continued implacably, you work for me. Schedule 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Function general cleaning. Salary minimum wage. A minimum wage, he stammered, finally finding his voice. Exactly, the same you thought I deserved. The revenge was perfect, poetic, absolutely devastating. And one more thing, Maria added. Every day at 6 p.m. you'll report to me for evaluation of your work, exactly like you made me do. Richard tried to process the total humiliation. The man who commanded $2 billion would now earn $7.25 per hour cleaning the very office he built. Any questions? Maria asked politely. Richard opened and closed his mouth several times, but no sound came out. The 5 words, you're fired, get your things, had literally left him voiceless. And the man who gave everyone the chills had finally found someone who left him not just quiet, but completely destroyed and silenced, forever. The next day, at 6 a.m. sharp, Richard Blackstone showed up at the office of now Santos Capital, wearing the navy blue janitor uniform. Maria was at her desk, Richard's former desk, reviewing international contracts when he arrived. Good morning, Maria, he said, voice hoarse with shame. Good morning, Richard, she replied without looking up from documents. Your cleaning equipment is in the storage room. Start with the bathrooms. It was surreal. The man who commanded international meetings now received orders on how to clean toilets. Richard took the cleaning cart, the same one Maria used, and headed to the bathrooms. Each step echoed on the marble he had ordered installed. Richard, Maria called him before he left. Yes? Do a good job. I have a meeting with Japanese investors at 9 a.m. They value an impeccable environment. Understood. During the morning, employees discreetly observed Richard cleaning floors, emptying trash cans, organizing bathrooms. Some felt pity, others silent satisfaction, seeing justice being done. Michael approached Maria around 10 a.m. Dr. Maria, don't you think you're being too hard on him? Maria stopped working and looked out the window. Down below, Richard was washing the building's sidewalks. Michael, she said thoughtfully, for 4 years he systematically humiliated me, made me feel inferior, incompetent, invisible. But now you've already gotten your revenge. This isn't revenge, Maria corrected him. It's education. He needs to learn empathy and practice. And if he doesn't learn, then we'll have discovered that some people are incapable of change. But I'll give him the chance he never gave me. At 6 p.m., Richard presented himself in Maria's office for the daily report. "How was the first day?" she asked cordially. "Humiliating," Richard replied honestly. "Elaborate. I cleaned bathrooms where I once made million-dollar decisions. I collected trash from desks where I signed international contracts. I washed floors where I walked as absolute owner. And how did you feel?" Richard hesitated. "Small, insignificant, like you must have felt when I humiliated you." Maria nodded. "First lesson learned. Keep it up." "Maria," he said impulsively, "may I ask a question?" "You may." "Why didn't you just fire me? Why this education?" Maria leaned back in her chair. "Because firing you would be too easy. You'd continue being the same arrogant man just somewhere else, humiliating other people. And this way? This way, you'll learn in practice what it means to be treated as inferior. You'll develop empathy you never had." Richard stood in silence, processing. "Besides," Maria continued, "I want you to understand that dignity doesn't come from position or salary, it comes from character." "What do you mean?" "Even cleaning floors, you're still a human being who deserves basic respect. Something you never understood about me." Richard left thoughtfully. In the second week, something began to change. Richard was cleaning the meeting room when he heard Maria conducting a video conference in Mandarin. He stopped to listen, impressed by her fluency and authority. "Incredible," he thought. "For 4 years I humiliated someone more competent than me." In the third week, Richard witnessed Maria consoling Jessica, who had made an error in a report. "Don't worry," Maria said gently. "Mistakes happen. Let's correct it together and you'll learn." Richard remembered how he treated mistakes with screaming, humiliation, threats. Maria transformed mistakes into growth opportunities. In the fourth week, something unexpected happened. Richard was cleaning when he heard Maria on the phone with someone from the government. "Yes, Secretary," she was saying, "the Japanese investment is confirmed. $120 billion over the next 3 years. She hung up and sighed heavily. "Problem?" Richard asked, involuntarily. Maria looked at him surprised. It was the first time he had shown genuine interest in her work. "Political pressure," she explained. "Some politicians want to direct these investments to specific companies." "Corruption. Attempt. But I won't allow it." Richard felt growing admiration. "Even knowing you could create powerful enemies?" "I was already destroyed once for doing the right thing. I won't stop now." Her courage impressed him deeply. 3 months later, Richard's transformation was visible to everyone. He arrived punctually at 6 a.m., worked without complaining, treated other employees with respect. Arrogance had been replaced by genuine humility. "Good morning, Richard," Sarah said when he passed, cleaning the corridor. "Good morning, Sarah. How's the Germany project?" "Good, thanks for asking." It was surreal. The man who before ignored subordinates now took interest in their work. Maria observed the change attentively. During daily reports, she asked deeper questions. "What did you learn today?" "That Michael is much smarter than I thought," Richard replied. "I heard him explaining derivatives to Jessica with incredible teaching skills." "And before?" "Before I only saw him as someone who made mistakes. I never noticed his qualities." "Continue." "I realized Amanda has brilliant ideas about compliance, but never had space to express them." "Why?" "Because I monopolized all decisions. I didn't let anyone contribute." Maria nodded approvingly. "What else?" "Sarah has international contacts that could have helped the company grow much more, but I never asked her opinion." "And now?" Now I see I wasted the talent of incredible people out of pure arrogance. It was the most honest confession Richard had ever made. Maria, he said impulsively, may I ask a personal question? You may. How didn't you become bitter? After everything you went through, how did you maintain dignity? Maria, thought carefully. Because I chose to be better than those who hurt me. Bitterness would have transformed me into someone like you were. Ouch, Richard smiled sadly. But it's true. Besides, she continued, I carry the responsibility of proving that people like me deserve opportunities. I can't fail. And now, you've proven everything you needed to prove. Now I want to use my position to create opportunities for others who were underestimated. In the 4th month, something happened that no one expected. Maria was in a meeting with investors when Richard urgently knocked on the door. Excuse me, Dr. Maria, there's an emergency. What happened? I just heard 2 cleaning staff talking. They said there's confidential information leaking to the competition. Maria excused herself to the investors and went to investigate. How did you know this? She asked. They were talking while I cleaned. They thought I wouldn't understand, but they mentioned specific client names and contract values. Are you sure? Absolutely. I even know who's leaking. Maria conducted a discreet investigation and discovered Richard was right. An employee was selling privileged information. How did you identify this? She asked afterward. 4 months of cleaning taught me to pay attention to details, and 7 months working with you taught me to protect valuable information. Maria was impressed. You saved the company from immense damage. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me. What do you mean? Maria, Richard said with total sincerity, you gave me the greatest lesson of my life. You transformed me from monster to human being. You transformed yourself. I just created the circumstances. No. You could have fired me, publicly humiliated me, completely destroyed me. Instead, you educated me. Maria was moved. May I make a request? Richard asked. What? When my year as janitor ends, I'd like to continue. Working for you as a normal employee. In what function? Any. I learned that position doesn't define value. I want to work in a company that treats people with dignity. Maria smiled. I have a better idea. What? How about becoming a consultant in corporate humanization? Teaching other business people not to repeat your mistakes? Richard was surprised. You would give me a second chance. Everyone deserves a second chance when they truly learn. And do you believe I learned? Maria looked into his eyes. Richard, you went from one of the worst leaders I've ever known to one of the most upright men I've ever seen. Of course you learned. 1 year later, the transformation was complete. Maria Santos had become the most respected CEO in America. Santos Capital was the #1 fund manager in North America, with $2 trillion under management. The company Richard had commanded with fear now functioned with inspiration. Productivity had increased 600%, employee turnover was 0, profits broke monthly records. Good morning, Dr. Maria, Michael said, entering her office. He was now CFO, promoted for merits Richard had never recognized. Good morning, Michael. How are the numbers? Exceptional. Another $500 million raised yesterday. 8 new international funds want partnerships. Maria smiled with satisfaction. And how is our humanization consultant? Michael pointed to the next room where Richard was conducting a workshop for Fortune 500 CEOs. Richard is lecturing to Fortune 100 executives, Michael said admiringly. Who would have thought the biggest corporate tyrant in New York would become the greatest expert in humanized leadership? It was true. Richard had become the most requested speaker in the country, telling his transformation from tyrant to empathetic leader. The journey from monster to mentor was his most famous lecture, watched by millions online. The turning point, he told fascinated audiences, was when someone treated me with the dignity I denied others. Maria taught me that true leadership is serving, not dominating. Maria watched his lectures with pride. Richard had become an evangelist of ethical leadership. At 6 p.m., as always, Richard appeared in Maria's office. "How was the day?" she asked, maintaining the tradition of daily reports. "Transformative," he replied. "Today I convinced 5 CEOs to completely change their corporate cultures." 5. One from construction, who screamed at employees. Another from retail, who created toxic environments. A third from tech, who humiliated developers. A fourth from finance, who abused assistants. And a fifth from pharma, who exploited researchers. And they agreed to change. When I tell my story, how I was before and how I am now, they realize it's possible. Maria smiled, satisfied. "How many companies have you transformed?" "Directly, 67. Indirectly, through CEOs who changed, over 400. "Impressive." "Maria," Richard said, "may I make a confession?" "Of course. I'm happier today, earning 1/10 of what I earned before, than I ever was as a billionaire." "Why?" "Because now I matter to people. Before, people feared me. Today, they respect me. And what's the difference? Fear is temporary. Respect is eternal." Maria was moved. "You learned the most important lesson of all." "Which one?" "That true power isn't making people fear you. It's making them want to be better because of you." Richard nodded. "I learned that from you." "Richard," Maria said, "I have news. Good or bad? Depends on how you interpret it." She smiled. "I received a proposal to be Treasury Secretary." Richard was surprised. "Will you accept?" "I'm considering it. The country needs structural reforms that only someone with my international experience can implement." "And the company?" "Would stay with you." Richard almost fainted. "With me? But Maria, you're the person who best understands this company's values, who most lived its transformation, but I no longer have credibility in the financial market." "Richard," Maria laughed, "you saved 67 companies from toxicity. Your credibility today is higher than ever. You trust me? I trust the man you became." Richard was moved. "Maria, how can I thank you for everything you did for me? Keep transforming people. Prove that change is possible." 5 years later, Maria was Treasury Secretary, having implemented the greatest economic reforms in American history. The country was now the world's leading economy. Richard ran Santos Capital with the same values Maria had established. The company was a global reference in ethical leadership. The story of the janitor who became secretary and the CEO who became human was mandatory case study at Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. Every year, on the anniversary of his transformation, Richard still cleaned the office. "Why do you do this?" new employees asked. "To never forget where I came from," he replied, "and to remember that dignity doesn't depend on position." The 5 words, "You're fired, get your things," had changed 2 lives forever. Maria had proven that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. And Richard had learned that true success isn't in how many people fear you, but in how many you help grow. The man who gave everyone the chills became someone who inspired hope in everyone. And it all began when a janitor refused to accept being treated as inferior.